All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited to have a rich and exciting conversation about what was a rich and exciting debate last night. So, we, for those of you who haven't seen or heard, we did conduct a live focus group last night. We had 7 undecided voters. And then a number of Trump supporters and a number of Harris supporters. And it was a really interesting conversation that we did live for Fox. We also sent out a number of the key moments to find out how people were reacting to the night, and wanted to give you guys a sort of inside conversation about what it is that we saw. So before we start our conversation, I just want to share with you a couple of outtakes of things that we saw last night. So first of all, one of the big questions that we're getting is who won last night? And I'm just going to share this clip with you, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion about it.
How many of you say Kamala Harris won after everything you saw tonight? Raise your hands high. How many of you say Donald Trump won? Raise your hands high. 1, 2. Okay, is that everybody? Let me do this again. How many say Kamala Harris won? Raise your hands high. I didn't see everybody. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. How many of you say Donald Trump won? Okay. So most of you say Kamala Harris. I want to start by talking just for a second about Kamala Harris. How many of you say Kamala Harris met your expectations tonight? She did what you wanted her to do. Raise your hand if you agree with that. How many say she did not meet your expectations? Okay, so she won, but she didn't necessarily meet your expectations. What did she not do? Yeah.
She wasn't very specific when asked certain things. She skirted around certain issues, but she knows how to pull at your heartstrings. She knows how to be dramatic in a way that will touch the heart of Americans while avoiding the hot button questions.
Okay, you want to say something about that?
I was gonna say, yeah, she put a good performance for the people watching at home, but ultimately, she and President Joe Biden has been in office for 3 years now, going on 4 years, and they have yet to do anything. Executive orders.
All right, so I'm just going to pause there for a moment because I want to just sit on this for a minute. So it was really, I mean, 12 of those 17 voters said that Kamala Harris won the night. We had 7 undecided voters, and not one of them changed their mind on who are they going to vote for, and they really didn't know where they were going to go. And so when we talked to them, they really said Kamala had a great night. She was super prepared. Her messaging was spot on. She landed a lot of punches, and yet she failed to deliver what was going to move them from a voting perspective. And I think that's what we would argue is the difference between effective messaging and an effective language strategy. Effective messaging can sound really good, but it might not move you where you want to go from a behavioral perspective, and a language strategy would. So I would love to hear from Michael, Ben, and Keith a little bit about your reactions to what Kamala Harris was trying to do last night, and how did she do, both in terms of laying out her vision, her style, and her attacks, and her overall strategy.
Well, I've never been hesitant to jump in. So first of all, it's great to see a lot of familiar names and friends on the line. Please, you can chime in on the chat as we go through this with questions or comments, reactions. Clapping is allowed. Anything that feels appropriate in the moment. But happy to be here. And one of the things that we tasked ourselves with as we were prepping for this was to try to not give you the same thing that you've heard from the 8,000 other people that you've probably heard from over the course of last night to today. So hopefully we accomplished that. But as I was reflecting on what Kamala tried to do and how she did it, I mean, I think that there are things that have been covered, but that they are really, it's the future versus the past. It's me versus you. It's sane versus not. And those were kind of 3 of the core things that she was trying to set up as the differences between her and Trump. I think that there were other things that she needed to do that I'll leave to others to get into. But on each of those areas, I think I think on the future versus the past, I think she did a great job of talking about turning the page, of trying to establish that she was not President Biden, that she was not the old guard, whether it changed people's votes. I think, Lee, I think what you saw in the group was particularly telling. In the me versus you, I think she was very good at coming back to that difference between I'm going to be there to focus on you as the voter. Donald Trump is going to be all about himself. The sane versus not. Actually, I heard Governor Shapiro say something that I thought was particularly telling in the spin room after, which is that. And I don't know whether she did a good job reminding people or he did a good job reminding people, but somehow people were reminded that Donald Trump is, in fact, who they remember him to be at the end of the 2000 election cycle. And ultimately, I think while we can debate whether or not Kamala's language strategy was effective, I think it's pretty clear that Trump's language strategy was not effective in making his points. He missed a lot of opportunities. So, I think she did pretty well in a lot of places, but I agree, and we'll get into this, that there are places that she did not do what she needed to do in order to win people's votes.
From a language point of view, I just want to jump on that, Michael, that I've been looking through the transcripts, and in terms of trying to remind people who Trump was, Harris said either Donald or Trump or both a total of 62 times. And Trump did not mention Kamala or Harris once, although he did mention Trump 6 times, which was a kind of funny line. But anyway, so I thought she did a very good job of that. And really, she was able, in a weird, I haven't totally figured it out way, to turn him into the incumbent. Right? I mean, going with what you were saying, Michael, she really went pretty far to almost turn around kind of what was one of her biggest weaknesses, which was, how do I separate myself from Joe Biden? Right? She did that with her use of language. She did that with the line around turning the page, right? Taking almost the mantle of making America great again, but turning the page. Let's keep on going forward. She did that in so many different ways by saying president, 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 former president, former president, former president. She kept repeating his role in former government. And she even, and I don't know how she did this either, she put him on the defensive in terms of Obamacare. She made, in the end of the debate, and it was partly the questions being asked as well, he was defending Obamacare. He said, we can do better. And I was just very struck by, from a framing perspective, the gap between make America great again to we can do better. It's a real shift in my mind.
So, Keith, it's interesting that you talk about how she was effective with a turn the page. And I agree with like the artful use of former president, turning the page. It was all, as the voters we talked to last night really agreed, there was a lot of artful prose there. But what they did say is they failed to demonstrate how she would be different. And the thing that I thought was so interesting from a framing perspective is Donald Trump did, even though he missed a lot of opportunities, we can talk about those, he did jump on this idea that, well, if you're going to do those things, why haven't you done them in the last 3.5 years? And that line that he used got repeated back in our sort of post-debate follow-up, I don't know, 6 or 7 times, because he set this parameter, sort of like almost like in a jury. It's like, you got to think about this one thing, right? Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago or now? It's like, then why didn't you do it 3.5 years ago? And her whole argument was it was a new page. He's saying it's not a new page. And I do think that voters were left with a lot of these. Okay, she says, he said she lacks specifics. She says, I have a plan for everything. And then he goes back and says she has a copied plan. And then interestingly enough, when it came down to talk about the Affordable Care Act, they pushed him on the plan. And he said, what was the word he used? I've got a concept. And
right, a concept of a plan.
I've got a concept of a plan, which was so fascinating because today all the Republicans are really talking about how Kamala lacks specifics, but yet a concept instead of a plan, which I think is less specific. But So I am curious though about this. It's sort of I've now rambled a little bit extra. What I'm trying to say is that people were looking for specifics and weren't sure that they bought that she's really turning the page yet. And I think that was a little bit of a miss for her.
Yeah, I think that, well, first of all, the philosophy of everything we do is it's not what you say, it's what they hear. And it's fascinating for me to see those undecided voters and what they heard or didn't as we all listen to the same debate. For me, Harris had to do three things. The first you hit on, which is to make it personal, to talk about how she's the advocate for everybody. And she, I thought, did that at the beginning when she talked about the ability to pay for groceries and buy a car seat and buy a crib. And at the end, she did the same thing in her closing about, I'm the one who's here for you. It's a really interesting contrast in language to me of how Trump won in the first place. Whatever you think of him and his motto, Make America Great Again, the 2016 parallel was, I'm the one for the forgotten American. Hillary Clinton's logo was, I'm with her. So Kamala Harris has flipped that by saying, I'm the one for you. You will not hear him talk about you. And she put him to the test, and he really didn't talk about the American voter the way that she did. She also had to do two other things that haven't come up yet. I think she had to shatter this halo that I think some people have assigned to the Trump presidency, particularly undecided voters who aren't feeling very good. If you're not feeling good in America, the very natural inclination is to blame the people in power. It's as true as it's now as every time it's been in politics. And so, I think that she has tried to craft herself as she's like door number 3, right? This election began with the double haters. I don't want either of these guys. And she's like, well, I'm not either one. And Trump had the opportunity to say, you're the incumbent. It's the Biden-Harris administration. And so, I think she has tried to create that opportunity, but that moment where she's like, look, you keep wanting to go back to the glory days. And I know people are busy, but COVID, the economy that came out of it, and then the Capitol attack. Like that was the last thing that happened, whether you agree with it or not. And I think she was effective on those things. Trump's opportunity on, you had a chance, you haven't done it. I totally agree with you, Lee. I just think it was scattered. It was a little bit here, it was a little bit there.
So I think just we're getting a couple of comments in the chat that I think are really instructive and important to address. So first, and I'll leave it to you all to decide whether you want to say it. So I am an anti-Trumper, but my job here is not to be a spokesperson for one side or the other, and that's where we're trying to and how we're trying to approach this, which is difficult and actually requires you to kind of step out of yourself and look at things. And I will say, going back to 2016, when I similarly had negative views about Donald Trump, very early was one of the people who said his communication style was one that was extremely powerful and had the potential to win over a tremendous amount of voters and win the election. And so I think as we're here, for all of us, we're trying to kind of look at not what we think, but what it is that we think either undecided voters with whom we've done a lot of research or voters on one side or the other of the political spectrum are going to think and how they're likely to react to communication. And the other back and forth in the chat is I think evidence of what we see all the time, which is that the kind of what you hear is so clearly dictated from the perspectives, the belief systems, the kind of what you believe going into something, that it is very hard to separate what you want to hear from what you actually hear. And so we are, extremely likely to hear from people who supported President Trump that, what one commenter here made, that Kamala, told lies all night and that President Trump was being attacked by everybody. And on the other side, we're going to hear the opposite, that, Trump told lies the whole time. And, is there an objective truth? Well, we can fact check things. But the reality is that like this election comes down to which candidate is better able to frame the narrative in a way that pulls people who are either on the other side or in the middle more effectively over to their side. The people who are kind of predisposed to believe one thing or the other are not going to change their votes. And what's most interesting, I think, to all of us is what happens in that middle.
Mm-hmm. And just to, if there is a specific question about the voters that we showed on the screen earlier, there were 4 of them were Trump supporters that we talked to last night. 5 of them were Harris supporters, and 8 of them were truly undecided. 2 of them were Trump supporters in 2016 and had voted again for Trump in 2020, and they couldn't do it again. And they were really looking for a home. They did not know truly what they were going to do, and I think it was really interesting to hear from them how they reacted.
But I will say, I do think that there is even there, if we start to think about the narratives that they come into this with, the media narrative on the right coming into the debate has been around these two ideas of like, why haven't you accomplished this already? Why haven't you done anything about it already if you've been in power for 3.5 years? And why aren't you giving specifics? Right now, while that second one has certainly bled over, I think, more broadly into the narrative, in some ways, the challenges that you hear from people about, why they like or dislike somebody or what they heard or didn't hear are they just because they're uncommitted doesn't mean that they don't kind of come from a certain place, listen to a certain type of media, and kind of are predisposed to go one way or the other.
So I see your comments there. I think we did see in what we tested last night that some of Kamala's strongest answers were on healthcare, and when she gave some specifics. So I would agree with what you've got there. The questions on the economy and immigration. I think it's interesting that you say that it's a draw because what we heard from some of the voters last night, both in the focus group and in the survey that we did, is they didn't necessarily come away from either one understanding exactly what they're going to do. And I think that's what you're saying there. But I'm not sure that that's a win for Kamala as much as it is a win for Trump because he wins on the issues and she failed to move them on the issues. So I would maybe, I agree with your premise, but I might disagree with what I think is going to happen as a result of it.
It was interesting. This idea, which was in all week, by the way, we all gathered and said, okay, what do we personally think each candidate needs to accomplish here? And we all talked about this idea of going from vibe to vision, right? And this is no secret. The pundits have been talking about that all week as well. Interestingly, again, on the language side, she tried to replace having a plan with explaining what her plan was. And I don't actually say that in a completely critical way. She mentioned the word plan 23 times, and she kept saying plan, plan, plan. What we find in a lot of the research we do for our corporate clients is the complaints about detail and about proof points and specifics come when they don't like the rest of what you're saying. When you start telling them, actually, when you start reframing your message, suddenly those questions go away because you're aligning more with their worldview and they are filling in what those details may be. And from what I saw last night, I agree that Harris did not come with a tremendous amount of detail, and we'll know in about a week about kind of some of the deeper polling that's happening. But I would bet that her numbers will move some in terms of people reporting that they have a better idea of who she is and what she stands for. And again, a lot of that was saying plan, plan. And Michael, I wanted to actually ask you, we haven't had a chance to go through this. I know that you did some work years and years ago with the Ross Perot campaign, who his entire campaign was about, I have a plan, I have a plan, I have a plan. And I was wondering kind of what you felt while you were listening to that framing there.
Look, I mean, I think she knew that was a really important piece of what she needed to do, which was to explain what she stands for. But as you said, and it really is, it's an incredibly important point and kind of always shocking when we see it that we can test two messages, one with more details and one with less. And the volume of details is not correlated to whether or not people hear details in the message. It is all about whether the details are framed within a narrative that people want to hear. And I think, Lee, to your point about her losing the language strategy, on that front, she didn't connect the what to the why in a way that was credible. And so they weren't able to kind of make that leap. I mean, she explained fracking, her position and what she would do on it in much clearer terms than one would normally need to hear. People didn't necessarily want to believe it yet, or she didn't explain why she changed her perspectives. I mean, the interesting thing, going back to your question, Keith, about Perot, because I will answer the question, unlike what we heard last night in some cases, is that his was all built on these detailed charts and plans, and it was very different from the other two candidates, and it is what gave him a lot of made his message really resonant for a lot of people.
There's a comment in the chat about this other frame of hopefulness versus fear, which I think was a really important one in the debate last night. And the question is, which lands better? Part of it goes to Michael's point about the basis for both candidates are so set that we're talking about a subset of people within 7 states. So what lands with them? And I think that, Harris's bet is that people do want optimism, that there is a sense of, when Trump talks about a state of decline and millions of people from asylums coming across the border and everything that is sort of pure Trump, that people don't want that anymore, that there's room here for something different from Trump and to some degree even from Biden, like a completely fresh, optimistic start, the vibe that she had at the DNC convention. And that's where she's headed. And I think that Trump is very much rooted in this idea that he wins by assuring folks that all of their fears can be addressed if he gets another term. And so the fear-based approach is what he's absolutely comfortable with. And he will go back to it and bring it up every time. The questions on immigration were about people streaming across the border and causing harm and eating, pets and everything that went with that. And then if questions weren't about that, he brought that back in. And so I think there's no modulation there for Trump. And she's kind of let him go with that and said, look, is that what you want? Like, why can't we have a country where there's an opportunity again? And I think we're going to find out more from the post polling over the next few weeks, which one lands better.
I just want to push on this a little bit, though, because I'm interested. And I'm going to play contrarian for a second, because I think it's a lot easier to play optimist, right, on the one hand, when you're the incumbent. And like, that's sort of what Biden administration was trying to do. The economy's never been better. And then interestingly, Kamala, I think, did reframe the fight against democracy to now our fight for freedom. And it's much more optimistic, but it's a reframe of where we are, right? And then the challenger, who in this case actually is also the former president, can come in and be like, look how bad it is, right? There's these problems and I'm going to fix them. And Trump has always been a challenger brand. That's what he wants to be. That's what he is. That's what his message is. So I think Kamala almost has no choice but to be positive and to elevate. And if I were to advise her, which no one has asked me, I would almost be doing something like, you know what? This has been a 2-step process. Phase 1 was the Biden administration, where we just stopped the bleeding. We had some problems. We need to fix them. We need to get things stable. And while things might not feel better yet, they're getting there. Let me give you, and I know it hurts, guys. I feel your pain. That's why I want to catapult us to growth to the next term. That's what this is all about. Because I think what's missing here in her optimism is the pain, the very real pain that Americans are feeling. Fewer than 1 in 5 Americans right now feel optimistic about the future. So you have to give people a reason to be optimistic. And she, because she's part of this administration, has to give us a reason to believe that she can be the answer to the malaise that exists. So I almost feel like it's there's two sides to this coin, and depending where you fit is how you have to play your hand. And I think both of them are playing it. I don't think Donald Trump played it particularly well last night, but the idea of, where have you been the last 3.5 years, and things have gotten really bad. Let's talk about how bad it is sort of what he has to do in order to.
Well, I think the interesting thing, I would say that you're right about being effectively the incumbent. You can't bash what's just happened. But when Obama was running, he didn't take a negative. It wasn't a negative tone when he was running, to be elected for the first time. When Clinton ran, when Reagan ran, like there are many people who were running as challengers who took an optimistic tone. And so I think that could be a way to do it. Certainly is not Trump's way to do it. But I totally agree with your point about the last 3.5 years. I think when Biden was touting how good the economy was, and he was basically saying the numbers prove how good the economy is, so forget how you're feeling. That was a huge mistake, right? And it was obvious to everybody except for him at the time. But there's a kind of a flip of that I think could be effective now, and it's really along the lines, Lee, of what you were saying, which is that we did a lot of work, but we know that people have not felt it yet. And there's a lot more work to do, and we've taken steps in these places, and that's why we're having an impact on inflation. And I'm going to do more to make it happen. And Connect, she started to, but I don't think that she leaned on it as much as she could have, which is kind of where unemployment was when they took office, how inflation was starting to go up when they took office, and that there were a lot of problems that were created then that they did have to, the mess that they had to fix, but that she's got to either say that the job isn't done, as you said, and that there's more work to do. She can't ignore the fact that people are not feeling it yet.
And really what you're talking about, Michael, is something we run into so often. So many of you guys on the line here are corporate and communicators and marketers, and you see this as well. Groucho Marx had a great line, right? It was, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes? Right? And we see that so often in terms of, you can't go out and tell people it's night when they think it's day, and it could be dark in the middle of the night. Can't do it. And so as responsible and effective communicators, our job is how to make that bridge. And that's just what Michael, you and Lee have been kind of working at here from the Harris perspective of, how do we connect that to, you're not wrong. You're not wrong in how you feel. And we're going to start our conversation from there. I want to flip back, because we've been talking a lot about Harris, and one of the things we all also talked about was how what Trump really, one of his big objectives, of course, was to tie Harris, do the opposite. We're saying you are Biden, right? And again, in our work, we talk a lot about the importance of framing and of how to really shift how people are processing the information that you're trying to get out. Not just the words you're using, but there's how to reframe and then how to articulate it. And so he was trying to do that reframe. And in the case of last night, as a lot of people have already commented, the way he executed went a bit off of his strategy. And it was most obvious when she had the line of, you keep talking about Biden, I'm not Biden, I'm Kamala Harris. And that was interesting and important, in that his line at the end of the debate was perfect. 3.5 years, what have you done? But he didn't keep that in terms of repeating of that message, but also he went overboard. He started talking to her as if she was Biden, as opposed to keeping in mind where the audience is. It's Kamala Harris. How do I tie her to Biden, tie her to Biden, tie her to Biden, and figure out different ways to do that through strategic messaging to keep making that connection? He just overshot. He got carried away and he started talking about Biden, and people were like, well, what's that about?
Yeah, and from a strategic point of view, that I think it's really interesting, Key, that it's, when do you stop and just let the audience hear what you've said? So for me, Trump had two big opportunities on framed. One was this idea of the incumbency and specifics. Kamala Harris's platform is, I'm creating an opportunity economy. That's her frame. And I'm tying it to the opportunity to get a job, to pay for your groceries, to start a company, buy a house. Trump could have said, okay, that's great. So then what do we have now? You're in power. What's the opposite of an opportunity? Is this like an inopportune economy? This idea that you're somehow going to start something new. You've been in power. Why should we believe that you're going to create opportunities when you sit in the White House every day? And the other one is this idea of trust. If Trump could have said, just looked at the camera and said, look, this is my third go round. It's been 12 years. I'm the devil, I'm not changing. You've got me. Okay. Who's this? She's asked about values. And she said, I'm going to answer all your questions, and didn't answer a single one on changing positions. So I think on trust, he had an opportunity there too. But that's not how Trump campaigns or thinks. He dabbled in frames. She's a Marxist. She's me. I'm going to send her a MAGA hat. Like, if you're watching this and trying to figure out how he's pinning her, it bounced around a lot, I think, Keith, where he had an
She's a
opportunity.
chameleon.
Yeah.
She's a chameleon. She's a flip-flopper. You don't know who she is. She has no plans. She's got a copy of Biden's plan. You're right. He was all over when it came to the attacks. And another thing that I think is really interesting is when we talked to the group last night and also looked at the survey findings today, is most people agreed that Trump, I mean, the words that I went around the room and asked one at a time, what's one word or phrase to describe Donald Trump? They said crazy. They said unhinged. They said frustrated. They said angry. They said disturbed. They said there was not one word that wasn't referencing some kind of defensiveness, some kind of a posture of he's on his heels. And I thought it was so interesting because Trump is usually the puncher, not the punched. We haven't seen him stay that way throughout almost the whole debate. He got a few punches out. I mean, we're talking about a lot of attacks here, but I just thought it was so interesting. And when you talk to people, I asked voters about two moments that I think stuck out to me as particularly tough moments for Donald Trump. One, when he's talking about the dogs
Eating their pets.
eating their pets. And the other, when he really responded to rally size, those two moments were really, you could just see he was like, what is going on? But people almost gave him a pass. Well, that's Trump. He gets angry. He's a fighter. He gets frustrated. He gets off his game. I'm used to him. He comes unhinged, but you know what? We're not voting for him for personality. We're voting for him for policy if those people are supporting them. But he gets a benefit of the doubt that I've not seen almost anyone else, certainly no brands I know, get that kind of a benefit of the doubt. I mean, he had some, and those are some pretty big moments. If the reverse happened, and that was Kamala that had those two moments, it'd be a very different conversation today than we're having right now. And I'm curious why you guys think that works for him, or why people let it work for him. Because this is something I'm like, it's always been for the last 8 years, something I'm trying to crack. I have a little bit of reasoning, but I'd love to get your take on.
Well, I mean, I think, part of it is tribal, that he is kind of first and foremost a tribal leader more than he is even a politician, right? It's never been about his issue positions. It's been about what he stands for in a much larger way, who he represents or what he represents, as opposed to what he's going to do. And so when you're on that team, we do it all the time in life. When we have a team that we support, we forgive a lot, at least when it comes to, us against some other team when we're on an in-group. And so a lot of it is just kind of defending that position. And I don't say that in any kind of negative way. It's like, he's our guy. We're going to defend him, and we're going to look favorably on the things that he does. And this is part of what makes him great for those who like him, is the fact that he is the unconventional. He is willing to challenge the status quo. He is willing to say the things that other people don't say. I mean, I always felt like in 2016, the worst mistake that the Democrats made was to call him a bully, because he liked nothing more than being a bully. And, and it all kind of contributed to this sense of kind of who he was and what he represented. And so, when he gets to play that, he gets a pass. And now a lot of that support is baked. I mean, as many people say, he's got a high floor and a low ceiling. And there's just this small, gap that he's playing with. But it's not going to move a lot no matter what he does. And so that is kind of who he is. He's just playing a different game than a lot of than really any other candidate has played since, I don't know, the last super populist that we've had, who's really, I don't even know when that is in American history. We haven't seen it in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the bully front, and how he gets away with it. Lee, I had this moment last night where I had this flashback to this movie that came out in the 90s called American Beauty that you guys might remember. And there's a scene at the end where the bully who's been getting away with things the whole time, is on the defensive. And she's like, well, you're ugly. And the other kid says, like, well, you're boring and totally ordinary, and you know it. And the bully just lost, like had no comeback. It was the worst, most biting, devastating thing you could say. Like, no, I'm not. Like everybody, and
That's
I think
weird,
that
right?
was the
weird.
reaction.
And small.
Yeah,
Weird and small.
And so I think from a debate standpoint, that was a moment last night where, okay, did she win the night? Did she win that moment? But she's like, look what happens. Like, if you challenge this would-be president on his ego, look what happens. And everybody, and then put that in the context of actually being the president and what can happen in rooms with other people who know how to play that. And, will that matter to a subset of people who are reminded about Trump are like, yeah, I mean, man, he was doing fine. And then she brings up, people are leaving your rallies, and boy, the rest of the night just changed. And I think we haven't seen that yet. She knew that, and she's like, let me try that. Let me play onto his ego on crowd sizes and call people think he's boring. I thought it was a really interesting moment.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it kind of raises a big question of what's going to move. If that didn't move people, what's going to move people? Is it now a referendum on Trump where the Biden campaign thought that things started, and if there are just more opportunities to show undecided voters what you may have forgotten about Trump, then those voters will move to Kamala? Or does Kamala really have a steeper hill to climb that, like, she's got all the vibe votes that she's going to get, and now she's got to move to the vision and the explaining how her values turn into her views, and that's the delta that she's got to close, because that is the piece that she didn't close.
Yeah, and I
Right.
think that your point is so good about, like, that sliver of undecideds who all this is about is not a group of people. It's a few people who are going to need that detail because they're not buying it. A few people who respect Donald Trump's toughness and his ability to stand up to anybody and dog them out. There's such a wide range. And obviously the game here is to get just enough of them to do what you need. But building, Michael, on your kind of bully comment and how proud Trump last night seemed about that, talking about Viktor Orban having his endorsement. I thought that even more than talking about plan and vision, something Kamala Harris had to do last night was to build on what the story she started telling at the DNC, which was commander-in-chief, toughness. And I thought that one of the things that I thought she did most effectively was she was not just tough, she went after Donald Trump in a way that nobody else, other than perhaps Chris Christie, which didn't work for a lot of reasons, I've seen do. And she did it effectively. She faced him for a lot of what was happening. And I could hear her debate prep people saying, look at the camera, look at the camera. She was looking over here. She was looking at him. Because one, of course, her strategy was try to rattle. But two, I think she was just projecting an incredible amount of strength. And we kind of joked before about the just kind of how to think about the language of the debate and what maybe the word of the debate was. And I was very into that idea. And so my word of the debate was disgrace. The way she wielded the term about how former military leaders who worked in the Trump administration said, you are a disgrace. That is a powerful, powerful line. She didn't use it a lot. She said it twice. But I think that's one of the feelings that for a lot of people is going to last. This is a tough politician, a tough leader. Forget about tough woman. She's tough. And I think that was really important to get across. It's the feeling of that. Forget about the detail of it.
Interestingly, I think the riff on him being a felon didn't work. like all of
Agreed.
the litigation, all the charges against him.
Mhm.
I think that fell flat. I think the path, to the extent that you can peel people away from Trump, I think digging into either you can't hire people or you're terrible because all these people left your administration. He says he fired them, but he also hired them. And to go through and say never in history has had in 4 years has someone lost this number of of cabinet members, of military members, have had them call you this afterwards. Like, is that a person that you would want to be friends with, do business with, or have as the leader of your country?
There was, I
And
so agree. There was such a missed opportunity. It's so easy to do Monday morning quarterbacking with these things because it's such a high pressure situation. But there was a beautiful line to have been had when he kept saying, "But I know how to fire people. I know how to fire people." And it's like, but you don't know how to hire people. Why would you have to
Also-
fire every single one of those people? You hired the wrong people.
So you guys, I'm actually gonna once again play contrarian.
Hmm.
Most of what we're talking about is how artful her takedown was of Trump.
well, no, I agree with you that may not
It's
be the
like-
thing to be doing, or
We're
that's
like,
going to change
It
things.
was amazing. She finally landed the punch. She gets how to get under his skin. She's like, we're not talking about Kamala Harris and what she's going to do as president. We're not talking about in the same way that we did when, where Barack Obama was running. We were talking about hope and change and what that meant for the future. When Donald Trump was winning in 2016, we were talking about making America great again and building a wall. And we talked about his bullying and all of that. But here what we're doing is we're talking about the art of the takedown of Donald Trump, not
Yes.
about the art of the buildup of the American people.
Okay, but so I'll give you I'll counter. I'll see you're a contrarian, and I'll raise you a counter contrarian, which is that so there are two theories of the case, I think, about how you win. One is that you move the undecided to your side and they vote, right? The other is that you rally your base and you get them out to vote and you build enthusiasm. And that Kamala's campaign has been extremely successful so far in taking what was basically a party that wasn't going to show up on election day and building excitement. And they built excitement all through the convention. And then it kind of seemed like the excitement peaked and the narrative started to flip about whether or not the vibe election was going to be enough. And this will have rallied the base in a significant way to show that she can fight Trump, that she can take him down, and that from a fundraising perspective, from a get out the vote perspective, may be the difference in what matters in November. And there's an element of that I just want to throw in as well, which is the body language kind of debate that was going on here, and that it was very clear, and kind of hat tip to Will Howard for putting it in this way, but that like the campaign was preparing for the memes that were going to happen as a result of the debate. I mean, this was not a spontaneous move, and it's showing up on social media everywhere, and it was clearly designed for what they knew what was going to happen, and certainly for the base, maybe not for undecideds, but certainly for the base, I think is a very effective move.
So I think, it's a risky strategy just going after the base. And I think that's what this did. It did energize the base because when you look at the polling right now, Kamala is just fought to stand still. Now, just a couple things I want to point out. She's not even in as good a shape from a polling perspective as Joe Biden was in 2020. She has gained ground, gotten us back to where Joe Biden was in April of this year. She hasn't picked up her key demographics that you would expect. She has picked up some.
Mhm.
But in recent history, there's almost always been a block that you move to your side that wasn't there before in order to win. And I don't see it. And I think there's something really interesting because we had a few immigrants in our group last night. I had one in a group this afternoon, and I had a couple in the survey that went out last night that were really talking about the immigration issue, and they were immigrants themselves. Mm. And seeing what has happened to the Hispanic vote has been fascinating to me. But all of these people really talked about the immigration issue and how it's so unfair. They did it the right way. Their parents did it the right
Totally.
way. It's all, and Trump had this whole narrative going before Kamala came in that was about fairness. Immigration is unfair. The system is rigged. They treat us unfairly. They go unfair. And he's lost that thread. But I think there is this group of people. There's two groups that I think are, it's really interesting. I think there's the Latina vote, and I also think that there's the young white male vote. These two votes that are so critical, and I don't think Kamala did anything to extend to those groups that I think are ultimately going to decide this election, which is like maybe the first time in a while that we haven't had a soccer mom or a hockey mom or some kind of a mom that was going to decide the vote. It's a different game, but I think it's interesting. She's not expanding. It's math.
I think that's right. The soccer moms are all voting for Kamala, but they're not there.
That's for sure.
But it is the young white men, and it is Latinos, and it is even blacks who split from Biden have not necessarily come back. So I think everything that you just said is really insightful stuff.
So there's a question that came up that just got put in here. I just want to say it's curious on what you think Kamala should be saying regarding the last 3.5 years and her role.
I think we
knowing
talked
that
about
this-
that, didn't we? I was referring to that question from Rob
Okay.
when we were
Okay.
talking about it. But I think the negative positive in the chat is a good one to talk about. Of the, somebody mentioned that Trump was his vision of the world that we're operating in, of the U.S., is extremely negative, and Kamala's was very positive and optimistic. And one of the comments was that usually people say don't go negative, and so does it work? Does it not work? Is it working here? Is, I think, a really interesting question.
Yeah, and I've lost track of the pushback on the pushback, and so I'll just keep pushing ahead here and say that I was talking to Lee earlier about the closing statements, because now they have these commercials, which I still find kind of awkward, and so they broke for commercial right before the end, and so that was a chance for both of the candidates to just take a breath and say, okay, what's the last thing I want people to know? And Kamala Harris ended her closing statement by saying, "You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, your desires. I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first." That was her point. And his last point was, we're a nation in serious decline. What these people have done to our country, allowing millions of people to come into our country, many of them are criminals. They're destroying our country, the worst vice president and president in history, and then ended it. And so they both have their tacks. I think that she is talking about what she would do for the American people, not to the degree that some of those voters needed to hear. I think in the final weeks of the campaign in Georgia, in Nevada, and Pennsylvania, the specifics for some of those demographics, Lee, I think she will go in very tailored to trying to pick up 10,000, 15,000 votes on very specific issues. And on the body language thing, Michael, I think we talk a lot of times about the strategy of language. And there was absolutely such an interesting twist in the strategy of body language last night. Biden's failure on this, again, he had a bad night. We all know what happened, but he stopped debating, even if he was debating, every time he wasn't speaking, forgetting the camera was on the whole time. She went completely the opposite. And that she was actually speaking her language, whether you liked it or not, the entire 90 minutes. From the moment she got on stage and crossed over and shook his hand, which caught him by surprise. And, not only was that like a power move of I'm in charge, but she said, "Hi, Kamala Harris." Like, that's how you say my name. You have no reason to say it wrong anymore now. I've introduced myself to you. And I think that using the body language was an interesting part of it. You could say, well, Trump didn't. He was only looking down. Like, that's his way. I'm looking at you, the moderator. I don't want to engage. Really interesting to me.
Or call her by name.
Yeah.
Right. So there are a couple other things in the chat that I think are really worth picking up. And one is what it means to be a female candidate and how she navigated that. And I think as Clea said in the comments in the chat, that she left no doubt in anyone's mind that she can hold her own against anyone. I think there's no doubt that first of all, I do think that everyone gets criticized for their kind of body language and how they present. We can see how JD Vance is being like obliterated for the things that he does poorly. I think there are a certain set of kind of narratives around women politicians or women leaders in general that are often difficult to overcome. That they're too emotional, that they're that they're screaming instead of talking, that they're weak. I think my sense is that actually she did a very good job of navigating that. I think my one critique of her and of Trump actually is that they both played in one gear the whole time. And the power of communication is often, it's in the pause. It's in slowing down and saying something that people have to react to in a different way from trying to spew as much stuff as you can. And that they both would have benefited from doing that more. But that I thought she did a very good job of actually looking comfortable up there after the first answer, and presenting herself in a way that kind of made the female issue disappear into the background.
Yeah.
I actually spent a fair amount of time going through the open-end questions that we asked in our survey overnight. And I did the same thing in 2016 when it was Hillary Clinton. And the attacks on Hillary were so personal. It's like, she reminds me of my ex-wife. It's all like shrill, like all of that. Like, I mean, it was always this like very personal gendered nonsense. It was rooted in a lot of things, but it was gendered. Nothing. I mean, we could talk about her facial expressions, but I mean, for the most part, it was so free from gendered language that I was, as a woman, like relieved. I was pleased. And last night during the group, there were 3 people who called her presidential. And I thought, like, how far have we come just since 2016 when that was not, she just, I don't think that gender is as big of an issue with Kamala. She's done an amazing job of it. I think that is
identity more broadly, right? Like, she's not an identity-driven candidate in the way that we would have expected, a Black East Asian woman, major party nominee to be, certainly from the Democratic Party. And I think that's to her credit. And I think it actually helps her so much with much of the population. But there's another comment in the chat that I just like, the point about earning her moderate stripes and whether she should look for a sister soldier moment. What do you think about that?
I think this is a tough one because I think I don't know if you've heard or seen any of the memes about sort of the using the Boy George's song, Come a Chameleon, and her sort of like adapting. She's adapting. So a move to the middle. And certainly we heard Bernie Sanders last week come out and say, like, she's going to say what she's got to say to get elected, but make no mistake about it, she's progressive. There's a risk for her to tack hard to the middle right now. Unless she has to, I really think she'd have to explain why. And I'm not sure it would help her to do that. What I do think she needs, and I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, is a symbolic plan of some type that shows how she's going to take on some of the issues that are most important to America. I don't think you can just call it an opportunity economy. You have to have a symbolic gesture or a plan with detail of some kind that's going to give something to hang their hat on and say, okay, this is why it's going to be different.
So that's kind of the policy side, but I think what we're seeing is she's tacking incredibly hard to the middle in the packaging side, right? I mean, we talked about the commander in chief and the military strength, and again, getting back to my free half hour this morning that I was kind of geeking out on ChatGPT and the transcripts. She said America or the United States more than 50 times. He said it 8 times. And that wasn't by accident. Like, he's got his own thing about this country and how everything's going terrible. She keeps repeating. And I think that there's an impact there. It's not instantaneous. It's not one thing, but it's how she's packaging, how she's approaching, I was about to say the marketplace, but the voters in a way that is telling them, I am in the center. This is where I am. This is my values. Middle class. I grew up middle class. Like, I think she's doing that, not getting into the policy side so much. And I think it's smart to be doing that. That's framing, right?
It is rooming. It's a question of our people buying her as somebody that's moderate.
Yeah. So I wonder if with the people who are on, did anyone change their mind? Just by a thumbs up or a reaction
show
that
of
won't, I
chat.
think, attribute to you? Not I. All right, you want to bring us home, Lee?
So I would ask one last question, which I really wanted to ask, which is, and maybe I will anyway. So if you were to think about what we learned from last night and talk about how it applies to our clients, one lesson that we should all take away, because we're all communicating all day long. What's the lesson that you think we should take away from last night? Michael, start with you.
Well, I think the thing that, well, I'm going to give you two quick ones. The first is that everything communicates. The fact that, you know, it is not just what you say, it's what you don't say. It is how you say it. It is all of the context in which you're operating that has a big impact on how you're perceived. And the second is a little bit more kind of specific. Kamala, I thought, did a really good job of trying to kind of anticipate what was going to happen or what Trump was going to do and try and minimize the impact of it. So when she talked about you're going to hear a bunch of lies, it made it easier for her to come back and say there's a lie in a way that was more credible than if she was just trying to defend herself against accusations of lying. And so she was good at that idea of you don't want to wait for an objection. You want to anticipate those objections, know what the issue is going to be, so that you can get out in front of it. And that almost always helps in a communication context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add too, Lee, to what the lesson is for business. You know, one is never ever forget your audience. I think that, you know, when you think about a debate and you say, well, I've got to answer what they ask. I can't control what my audience is. And I think that this is a subject of like, well, no, they both understood who they were trying to reach in everything that they did, in what they answered and what they didn't answer. And I think having a really clear definition of success, no matter how high the stakes, how things can go sideways, what are you trying to achieve, and what does my audience need to hear, not just what I want to say, is something that both of them, I thought, did in their own way. And the other one is just the thing that we never talk about is preparation. I mean, it comes up in the context of debates, like debate prep and sort of tactical things, but you can't go into high stakes moments in any kind of business, and high stakes moments come up in surprisingly small ways, and not be so well prepared for what comes up. And I think that we saw that play out last night. You see it when it goes well, maybe you take it for granted, but you sure see it when they're not prepared.
And I would say too as well, just very quickly, first, and it's not being covered, it was something that jumped out to me. Bridging to context. You want to make a point, show how it fits into the broader context. She had a couple of great moments of that where they asked about Donald Trump's comments about her being Black or not. She did not address that directly. She said, yes, but let's talk about Charlottesville. Let's talk about these other instances where there has been insensitivity shown by Donald Trump. She did the same thing with January 6th. She didn't leave it at January 6th. She said, let's talk about some of the prosecutions. Let's talk about some of these other things. She said, let's tell a story as opposed to talking about a point in time. And the second, I wrote this down, declaring declaratively. How's that for something? We have so many instances where we're working with clients to get information across, and they either assume it's been said or assume people have gotten it. And this was such a great contrast with Hillary. Hillary's in Hillary Clinton's whole attitude in the debate was basically, you guys seeing this? Right? And guess what? It didn't work so well. She said, you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. Me and Tim, we own guns. I won't end fracking. Even the disgrace line. She was much more direct. And you could say she almost overdid some of those things, but that's the way that people might start to hear her if she lands at home. And again, in more nuanced ways, we do that all the time with our clients in terms of how do we get that out in a way that not just we feel like we said it, but people heard it.
Lee?
My takeaway is good messaging is not language strategy. And I've always tried to figure out how to articulate this in a way. There is messaging that sounds good. There's messaging that feels good. There's messaging for a moment. And then there's messaging that lasts to help people win, to achieve certain outcomes. I think Kamala Harris last night really did have excellent messaging, but I don't know that it's messaging that's going to last or endure. There's a question about some of the strategic phrases that she had. I think she had some very clever turns of phrases, the way she talked about the taxes and the way she talked about some other things. I'm just not sure it's going to stick and last and endure. And I'm not sure that it really ultimately is going to impact the polls. We'll know in the next couple of days. The other thing, my biggest takeaway is we need to do research, because it doesn't matter what we think. It really only matters what people hear. And last night when I was sitting there, I was sure, and like I took all these notes, I mean pages of notes of like what I thought was interesting and all the language that I thought was, and once I started talking to the voters and they started telling me what they were hearing, I was like, oh, I get it. And so I just encourage everybody, stay curious to this election. We've still got 50 some odd days left, and it's going to be a bumpy ride, but we really don't know the answer. This is so close, and language and messaging is going to play an extremely important role, certainly, on getting this right. But I am just, keep your ears open, because I think it's going to be an interesting ride.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Let us know what you think. And there's so much more to say. I feel like we could have gone on for another hour.
Absolutely.
But if they do it again, we'll do it again.
And feel free to reach out with any questions if you guys have them. All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Right.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.